And I'll let Commissioner Johnson, whenever he feels comfortable getting back in his chair, I'll let him feel free to start the meeting tonight. You're muted right now, Commissioner Johnson.
I don't have anything to share. Just want to thank everybody for all your hard work remotely. I know that's been difficult, but you've all done great work on the comprehensive plan and now working on the land use code to implement that plan. Great progress, great help from our consultants, excellent public process. I hear great things in the community and appreciate your work. And if everybody's here, we can get started.
Appreciate that. I'd also like to welcome, we have 3 or 4 attendees in the background. I'd just like to welcome them. We can't see you or hear you, but we wanted you to know that we know that you're out there and glad that you joined us tonight. I want to start off tonight. On Monday, I had an opportunity last Monday to visit with our Board of County Commissioners at or it was last Tuesday, I'm sorry, at their admin matters. And I got to present them with a award that the county received, and this award directly attributable to our Planning Commission, because the Planning Commission is the board that approves all master plan documents for the county, like the comprehensive plan and other documents like that. And so, you know, we worked hard as a Planning Commission, and we had some great help along the way. I know Sean and Jeff and Nancy and a lot of planning commissioners worked extra hard during that time to attend special meetings and do other things with us to make sure that that was a successful plan. And as such, I'm holding in my hands, here's a nice little award. We have been recognized by the state of Colorado chapter of the APA for having a honors award for a comp plan award for the best comp plan in the state regarding resiliency. So the work we did in the mountainous end of the plan and the work that we did thereafter has been recognized as by the state as being high quality work, and you all should be very grateful for doing a wonderful job, and I appreciate all the energy that you guys put into that. So congratulations.
Hey, Matt.
Yes, ma'am.
Tom Donnelly is attendee. Will you promote him, please, so he can be a panelist?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Now, wait a second. Can we take a vote on that?
Sure. I got to figure it out first, but yeah. Nope, panelist. Here he comes. Be nice. So next time you're around in the county building, I think we'll try to see if the commissioners will add the award to the bookcase on the second floor. Feel free to stop, take a look at it. But again, thanks for your hard work and congratulations for putting together such a great plan. For tonight's proceedings, I guess we're going to talk largely about the land use code. That's the follow-up to our comprehensive plan work. It's intended that this land use code update will reinforce a lot of the policies and guidance that the comp plan has identified in the last couple of years. And so we're updating it to make sure that we're consistent across the boards with those types of things. To do that, we're going to give a brief presentation as we always do, and then we're going to have some focused discussion. I called around to each of the planning commissioners today and asked some questions about what you might like to talk about. Are there any issues? And a few of you had some things that we might want to talk about, so we'll focus on some of those things. And when we're done with that, we'll try to open up the conversation to other items that you may wish to talk about as you've reviewed the land use code. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Matt Goebel and his team at Clarion, the presentation for this evening, and I'll chime in and off on as well as any of you can as well.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Matt. Hello, commissioners. Good to see you all again. I am going to be doing the first set of slides, but Gabby is actually going to share her screen because I apologize in advance. I've been having some troubles with my Wi-Fi connection. So just in case I get dropped off, we're going to go with Gabby's computer. And let's go ahead to the next slide. Matt stole our thunder here on the second slide. Gabby, you got that? I'm going to go ahead and tell you what the second slide says while Gabby works on pulling that up. Basically, it's just recapping what Matt said. So this is really going to be a shorter presentation than you've seen from us before. You've been with us in the weeds now for many months, going through a lot of the details. And so what we're trying to do with this presentation is what we're calling major focus areas. Some of the key takeaways, just a half dozen kind of key takeaways that I think when you talk with your constituents and your friends and your neighbors about the project and what's distinctive about it, these are some of the real kind of high-level things to emphasize. That's what we'll cover in our slides. And then, as Matt mentioned, a few things kind of rose as to the top as things that y'all would like to talk about a little bit more tonight. So those are, we've got them called further discussion at the end of our presentation. And really just wanted to emphasize at the bottom of this slide, the point of tonight's meeting, it's to talk about the code, to answer questions, but really to confirm that we're all on track to move forward with the adoption hearings starting on December 7th. That is just a few weeks away, but at the same time, we've accomplished a lot and the draft is in pretty good shape. So we're hoping that by the end of this meeting, we'll all get a thumbs up from you all that you feel like we're on track for that December 7th meeting. Tonight really is intended to focus on the bigger issues, the substantive conversations. I'm sure that if y'all have had time to sit down with the document, you've probably got some detailed line edits or things. Please send those to Matt by November 20th. We would like to go ahead and process all those in the next round of edits. So next slide, please, Gabby. Briefly, timeline to the adoption. What is the process going to be moving forward after tonight? Well, we've been modifying this slide, for all our presentations, and this one brings us up to speed. We released the full consolidated public draft the week of November 2nd. Last week, we had another series of open houses on Thursday evening, pretty well attended, a couple dozen people, I think, to ask general questions about the code. Now we're going to move forward into a more formal stage after tonight. So we've got the work session tonight with you all, but then we are moving into the proposed joint meetings with the board and the planning commission on the 7th and the 9th. And then we're reserving the 14th and the 16th as well if we need those dates. If you look over on the right at that box there, the current draft will continue into the adoption hearings. So we're not going to give you another 600-page document that you've got to try to process between now and those December meetings. What we're going to do is start to prepare a supplemental sheet. We call it an errata sheet that's going to itemize any changes. And so when you are on the dais on the meetings on the 7th and the 9th, you'll be talking about this code that you've already got in front of you, along with a separate set of any proposed amendments. So we're going to try to make it very clear to you where any potential changes might be, so you don't have to plow through another 600-page document as that comes out. We want to circle back at the end of this meeting and talk about the effective date of the code. We've talked a little bit about that in the past, but one of the things that we're proposing is that the effective date of the code be May 1st. And that is a bit of a lag time to give the staff the time to come up to speed, to update application materials, to do training for front counter staff, things like that. Maybe you want to have that be a less of a lag time or maybe more, but that's what the planning staff is proposing for conversation. And then, of course, we've got the follow-up amendments in phase 2, which are going to dig more into substance on some of the key topics like signs and parking. And we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation as well. So that's the process moving forward. We'll put this slide back up at the end of the presentation just to remind you all about the next steps. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more about public outreach that we've been doing. Commissioner Johnson mentioned some of the outreach, and we've done more since you saw us last. We've put together a series of fact sheets, for example. You can see a couple of examples on this slide. These are intended to just be high-level summaries of some of the big ideas that y'all are familiar with, but the public may not be if they're just getting into the project. These are all up on the website. We've been presenting those at the open houses. We did have open houses on the 22nd and then on November 12th now. And we have online commenting that's available on the county's website as well. That is going to be up through November 20th, so that we'll have time to process all that information and prepare that summary errata sheet that I mentioned moving into the December adoption hearings. Next slide, please. All right. That's all the process that I'm going to talk about. That's all the project management type stuff. Now we've got a series of slides that are going to cover substance. And again, we're going to do this a little bit differently than we have in the past. It's going to be shorter, and it's really just intended to hit the high points, to try to summarize some of the big themes. This is the overall outline. And the overall outline of the code has continued to evolve as we've been working on the drafting throughout this year. Basically, everything that's in black on this outline here is the stuff that's pretty significantly new or has been modified in some way. And that's the stuff that we're going to primarily focus on in this discussion tonight. The zoning districts, the use regulations, for example. There is important stuff that's still in this code that's in the gray colored text there, like special events and signs and, oil and gas facilities, floodplains. That stuff has not really been significantly modified as part of this phase 1. Now, some of it is scheduled to be updated in phase 2. So for signs, for example, we'll be going back in and doing a more substantial rewrite of signs in phase 2. Some of it you've already adopted, like wireless communications facilities, and that's just being rolled forward. It's been formatted to match this new code, but it's part of this document. So this is helpful to see this slide because it just helps explain why the document is so thick. And there's a lot of things that are being carried forward that are part of the code, but they're not necessarily part of the change that we've been really focusing on with you all over this last year. So this is the context. Again, these are the big ideas. Next slide, please. These are the focus areas. And this is what I and Gabby and Austin are going to focus on with you tonight. We tried to step back with Leslie and Matt and just try to think about the big ideas, the things that we wanted to emphasize. And I think these are really helpful summaries of a lot of work that you all have put in and everyone's put into the project. The code is much more tailored to Larimer County. I think it's tailored to different parts of the county. It's not one size fits all. The use tables are more detailed and they're more permissive, honestly, than what you have now. And we'll talk about that. The approach to agriculture has been a big focus, and it's been modernized, both in terms of the zone districts and the uses, and we'll talk about that. The overall review process for submitting and processing applications is more predictable, and it should be more efficient under this new code. There's more decisions made at the staff level, for example. We're not just introducing new stuff. We're maintaining a lot of strong controls that are already in place. This is all very much a balancing act, and things that Larimer County has been doing for a while, like adequate public facilities regulations, those are all being carried forward, pretty much intact. And so it's very much a balance of the new with what's working well. And then finally, the overall document is much more user-friendly. So that's where we're going, and we've got just a slide or two on each one of these topics.
Well, I think that's probably a good place for me to jump in. Looks like we lost Matt there. So we're going to talk about each of these main focus areas in turn, and I'll get us started with a code tailored toward Larimer County. And so our first place to start here was, of course, the new comprehensive plan. And as Matt mentioned, it's award-winning. Congrats on that. So we took a lot of the goals in the comprehensive plan and we worked really hard to try to implement them, and I'll walk through a couple of examples, but importantly, we've introduced this idea of character areas. And these character areas are a really helpful tool for us to implement the comprehensive plan. Part of what the character areas are doing are creating a toolbox, basically, based off the framework categories in the plan. And you can see a map of the framework categories taken from the plan on that right screenshot. Creating these character areas not only connects us to the comprehensive plan, but it also allows us to tailor standards based off the character of an area. So moving away from one-size-fits-all zoning to a more tailored approach. So I want to talk through this last bullet point, but I think I'm going to do so on this next slide so that you can see how the character areas align with the list of zoning districts. You can see we have those 4 character areas that's on the left column, and the 2 other columns show you how the zoning districts fit into those character areas. So a lot's kind of going on here, but for the most part, we've really carried forward the current list of zoning districts, even though it might look differently. And let me explain what I mean. There's a good amount of renaming here. So if you look at the industrial light district, for example, that's been renamed. Right now, you just call it industrial. So we renamed some of these districts to give the reader a better sense of how they differ from very similar districts, like the other industrial district, which is right now the I-1 district, proposed to be called the industrial heavy district in this draft. And it also gives some idea of what's to be included in that district. So that's why you're seeing some renaming there. And you'll also see some consolidations like the forestry district that combines the current FO and FO1 districts. And we did that because they are very, very similar. And then lastly, you're going to see some new districts. So if you look at that 3rd character area, the mixed center character area, you're going to see 3 new districts. And that is to align with a goal in the comprehensive plan to create these mixed center areas throughout the county. So we gave you 3 districts to use as a tool to implement that goal in the comprehensive plan. Okay, I think I want to move on and talk about an example of how these character areas were used to tailor standards. And you guys have heard something very similar to this before, but just to play out the concept one last time. So these 3 districts on the left, conservation and ag, rural, and mixed center character areas, those 3 character areas, well, they look a lot different than the urban character area. They are more rural in nature. They have a different type and scale of development. And so we were able to tailor standards to match that type and scale of development. So if you take parking, for example, in those 3 character areas, paving wouldn't be required, whereas in the urban character area, it would be. Okay, let's move on to uses. This is our next big focus area. So again, you're going to see the character areas pop up here. You can see them on that screenshot to the right. This use table holds 3 character areas, the conservation, ag, rural, and mixed center character areas. And you'll see those 3 character areas grouped together in this sort of way because they're more rural in nature. So again, trying to help the user find what they're looking for a bit more easily. And again, even in the structure of the use table, you'll see some big headings like agricultural uses, and then some headings within that main category like agricultural cultivation. And that's meant to get the user to the use they're looking for more quickly. Now, beyond the actual organization of the uses, you're also going to see some substantive changes. So we've introduced this idea of thresholds to many of the uses, and just to play that idea out really quickly, thresholds were used to tailor use permissions based on the perceived impact of a use. So thinking about kennels right now, the kennel use, we've tailored that use into 2 different thresholds, whether it's an indoor or an outdoor kennel. And then we were able to look at the use permissions and tailor them so that indoor kennels with the less perceived impact have an easier process of getting approved. So that's just one example of our substantive approach to the uses. And generally, as Matt said, we're trying to make things more lenient. Generally, fewer public hearings are going to be required. Okay, let's move on and talk about agriculture. So we've heard a whole lot about agriculture in our time with Larimer County in this project, and we worked really closely with a whole bunch of groups in the county, including the Agriculture Advisory Board. And what we've been trying to do is, again, implement the comprehensive plan. You can see one of the goals listed there, to preserve agriculture and ranching to support a rural economy. So how have we done that? I'll walk through a couple of examples. One way is that we've removed the definition of farm, which currently has an acreage size limitation, which excludes smaller type farms from the definition, and it also has some specific exclusions. We're moving to a new broader term, agricultural operations. It doesn't include any of those exclusions. We've also included more agricultural uses, and we're allowing them by right in many cases. And we've also added a new optional agricultural district that supports large and medium-sized agricultural operations. For those smaller sized agricultural operations, we've included more urban agricultural type uses. And we've also included some standards that we think will help address the potential impacts of those urban ag uses. Okay, with that, I want to turn it over to Gabby.
Thanks, Austin. So in conjunction with all of the improvements that Austin just mentioned to the fundamental zoning and the use standards, the code also lays out a more predictable and efficient review process. This is achieved in 3 major ways. First, the overall organization of the procedures has been updated to be more user-friendly, including the use of the summary table, a snippet of which is shown on the right, as well as flowcharts throughout each process. Second, the code includes new procedures to streamline approvals, and like Matt mentioned earlier, it allows staff to make more administrative approvals, and it decreases the time spent processing certain types of applications. And finally, it includes more objective review and approval criteria to make decisions both easier to make by the review authority, whoever that may be, and also it's more predictable to the applicant. And efficient development procedures also benefit from clear development standards. The code maintains many of the strong standards that are working well for the county, like the environmental resource standards and air quality standards. And as Austin mentioned earlier, some of the existing standards have been supplemented or scaled back depending on the character area, like we did with exterior lighting. And others will be a part of phase 2, which I will speak to in a minute. And all of the improvements mentioned thus far would be ineffective without a user-friendly document. Overall, the code includes more graphics and summary tables that really help simplify and clarify, as well as visualize certain technical zoning standards that can often be confusing and make the development review procedures more tedious than necessary. The layout of the document is organized in such a way that code users can more easily find the information that they are looking for. And then, like I mentioned before, certain elements of the code will be reviewed as a part of phase 2. To continue the code's focus on implementing the character areas, specifically the parking and landscape standards will be reviewed for more contextual standards. And then other key topics that will be addressed include the sign code, special events, housing types, urban farming, and the rezoning process. And so now I will pass it back over to Matt to finish us up.
I think we lost him. So.
Oh, sorry. I can't see that on my screen. Sorry.
No, I just looked down. He was here and now he's gone again. Apologize for that. He's having problems with his connection. Further discussion topics that maybe we want to talk about a little bit tonight came up as part of my discussion with several of you today. Those things that I think we would like to talk about tonight include adjacency of uses, which includes buffering discussions. There were some concerns with maybe a little bit of concern around the wildlife section of our code. And there was some comments regarding the references to the comp plan and how that works, because we don't want to view the comprehensive plan as a regulatory document. it's a visionary document or a guidance document. And so how does that get treated in the code, and how can we make sure that it gets treated properly? And then I think what we'll do is when we're done covering those 3 or 4 high-level items, we'll open up the floor for conversation and let everybody chime in on other things that they might have found in their review of the document, and try to cover those bases tonight, so that when we come back in December, hopefully those things are clarified, and we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about them. So is there another slide, Gabby?
Yeah, and I can walk through this one really quick, Matt. To say that we've gotten this question quite a bit, and so we wrote a FAQ, which you can find on the Larimer County website. It includes some of the information here. And then the answer to the question, is the county zoning changing as a part of this project? The county is not being rezoned as a part of this project. That is not included in this project. But some of the changes to the zoning districts, as I mentioned earlier, like the renaming of the industrial light district and the consolidation of the FO and FO1 districts, those are going to be implemented. That is part of this project. And generally, again, I would say that we're trying to make things more flexible and more lenient. The exception to that rule is the O district, where we're trying to tailor it toward a clear residential focus. But generally, we're trying to make these zoning districts more lenient. So I think that's all I want to say there. We can move on to this timeline slide, and we've already covered this, but maybe it's a helpful thing to leave up. Matt, you tell us. If not, we can go back to those topics we want to discuss now.
We go back one slide and we'll maybe start a little conversation about the zone districts. If we can hit that next slide, please.
I had a comment on that, and I think that we should be careful not to. I don't think saying the county is not being rezoned, I don't think that's an accurate statement fully, because there will be plenty of people who have a certain zoning on their property, and their zoning is going to change either as a result of renaming it or as a result of being combined with another zoning district. And so I understand what you're saying. You know, this is a rezoning plan, but there's going to be a lot of people out there who say, I don't have FO1 zoning anymore. What can I do now compared to what I couldn't do then? And it's good. They should have that conversation, but that's a rezone. It's a large countywide legislative rezone. And I just think we should be careful not to describe it as not being rezoned.
Well, and I don't disagree with how you phrase that, Bob. That's fine. I would actually say that we're not, when we take the FA1, E-Estate, E1 zone districts, and we consolidate them into one district called RR2, what we're doing is we're taking the uses that were allowed in those districts and carrying them forward to this new district. So you shouldn't be losing uses. There might be a use or two that has been renamed. For instance, we no longer call things a farm. We will call them an ag operation. But the use is still there. The premise is still there, what you can and can't do with those zone districts. The bulk requirements, such as minimum lot sizes and setbacks and those types of things, have been actually modified to match the zone district that had the easiest of standards. So if you were in a zone district that had 25-foot setbacks and we're consolidating it with another zone district that had 5-foot and 10-foot setbacks, we're going to move to the 5 and 10-foot setbacks, because we don't want to generate a bunch of non-conforming uses out there as it relates to setbacks or any of those bulk requirements. So it is a renaming convention. We are consolidating. I understand that people might feel like, well, yeah, they are changing my zoning and this and that, but on the surface, you see that initial instinct to say my zoning's changed. But when you dig deep into the details, we're simplifying everything, making it more flexible, and not trying to make it as heavily administered.
Hey, Matt, can you hear me now?
But I like it.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I can hear you, Matt.
Okay, can you guys see me? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in on that point. I think it's a really good just thing to clarify. You know, the language that we use in that first sentence. I completely agree that we just need to be sensitive to how that comes across. And oftentimes what we try to emphasize is that we're not doing a parcel by parcel, you know, reevaluation of the appropriateness of a zoning district on any one parcel and should that be changed. It's more just conversions and namings that are being updated, but we're not going in and looking at anyone's property individually. It's just thinking about how the overall rules should be updated.
Yeah. Does that help, Bob?
No, I get it. Absolutely. I agree with it, what you're doing, and I really appreciate it. And you've made the decisions that I would want you to make as it relates to taking the least restrictive bulk requirements and such. It's just the word rezone, you know, I'm an FA1, I'm going to be an RR2. If I'm not paying attention, I'm going to say what happened. And so we should just be ready to be prepared to explain
Right.
that.
So a lot of people who have the perception when they look at their zoning on a map, they'll see that, well, I was zoned FA and it was colored light green, and now I'm zoned RR2 and it might be a slightly different color. They're going to feel that some change did occur, and hopefully then we can have that conversation with them to reassure them that that we didn't have any intent on causing any change beyond that.
And Matt, also, as one of the reasons behind a lag time for the effective date of the code is to give that process a chance to play out and to give the staff a chance to answer questions from the public about those name changes or those conversions, and maybe say why they think that they really shouldn't fall into that new category. And it's just an opportunity for people to better understand how those things are changing. We also can then start to explain how more substantive map updates might come along in the future as part of phase 2, maybe if somebody wants to apply for the ag district, for example.
Right. Yes, Jeff?
Yeah, just a couple of things before we get going. I appreciate that you addressed the intent of the comprehensive plan, that it is not codified. Although there's still a couple of placeholders and references in here that I knew that. And I mean, there's work that needs to be done on this. We don't need to do tonight, as we talked briefly this afternoon. Maybe Matt and I found misspellings, a bunch of that kind of stuff, some references that were incorrect. I mean, we have 75 pages of 350, you know, the things like that need to be redone, but they're throughout, and we don't need to spend the time to do that tonight. I just want to make it really understood, and it's been an understanding of mine for a long time, and we have some new people here. I just want to make sure that we know that a comprehensive plan is advisory only. It is not, and it cannot be regulatory. I mean, there's state law, there's precedent here, and Frank could talk to that if it became a question. But we have to be really, really careful about that. Matt Goebel and your group, I want to congratulate you. You've taken a great deal of what we've asked you to do and done it in a very condensed time frame. I don't know what the code was before. What was it, 1,200, 1,300 pages was what it finally ended up being. It was pretty large. So large that we actually stopped having you send us updates and stuff on them. I don't think there's anybody on the Planning Commission now that gets them mailed to us. But I think it has simplified a lot when you input some more of those graphics and those kinds of things. It's going to certainly read better. One more point, and then we can go to specifics as we get to that. There are several areas in here that I don't think have become objective enough. And we'll talk about specifics of those later. But we've left the objectivity to, in a big way, to the director. And that was by design and on purpose. One of the things I hope the commissioners do in the future when it comes to the community development director, that they create some matrix, some nexus between what this person does on a daily basis, how many appeals that they're getting, because we've given so much decision-making in that seat, which I agree with. There still needs to be some way, I think, for the commissioners to be able to evaluate that. I mean, I would think if 1 out of 3 decisions a commissioner makes comes back to the commissioners because the decision doesn't follow our code, or they become arbitrary or capricious, that becomes a problem. If 1 out of 20 comes back, I don't know what the right number is, but I certainly hope that in the future, the commissioners tie this type of decision-making process and power that we've given to the director into some nexus of their performance review. And so I'll leave it at that, and then we can get into specifics later.
Commissioner Jensen, just to speak to that issue just real lightly, I could appreciate that. And I do think there are checks and balances in the proposal that would say if the director at any time makes a decision on an administrative item at an administrative level, a couple of things could happen. 2 out of the 3 Board of County Commissioners could ask that item be called up and be lifted and go through a public hearing process because they feel that there needs to be some public scrutiny of that decision making. If I'm an applicant and a decision is made and I disagree with that decision, or I'm a member of the public, I have the opportunity to file an appeal within a reasonable time frame. So there are checks and balances, I believe, that are built into the system that will protect everybody from the concept of having a rogue director from coming in and making arbitrary and capricious decisions that would leave the county looking somewhat exposed. So hopefully that answers that question a little bit, and we can move forward.
Yep. Thank you.
Well, can I weigh in on a couple of those things, Matt?
Yes,
those are really good points, Jeff. And I just wanted to respond to a couple. On your point about administrative discretion, I think that's a really good one. I mean, whenever a community is looking to change the balance of decision-making authority, and shifting things in one direction or another, I think they're going to get a lot of that right, but maybe not everything. And we often recommend that you step back after a year, after the code's been in place for a year, and you guys do a workshop and you get some data on, how many minor modification requests have you received? How many variance requests have you received? How many interpretation requests have you received? And then you all can step back at a policy level and say, do we think we got it right in terms of locating the power at where it should be, in terms of being as clear and we think objective as we should be? So I think just recognizing that the code is a living document, recognizing that you're going to have to come back and just evaluate, did we get some of those big policy decisions right, or should we adjust the thresholds? That's just an important thing to recognize now. I also wanted to just say on the comp plan, I'm not sure if you saw this, we did add language up in the general purpose statements to the code, clearly saying that the comp plan is a informational and guidance document only, not regulatory. So that's there. We added that language, I think, in response to both the county attorney's comments and maybe your comments as well. So we've softened the impact of the comp plan language throughout the document, but very specifically right up front, we've said it's not regulatory.
The one other thing I would add to that, Matt, is there are instances in the code where the comprehensive plan does have merits and should be given some credence in the decision-making process. And that's generally when you're doing a rezoning application. Yeah. You rezone property, you rezone based upon some idea of what the land use objectives of the county are based upon what's in the master plan or the comprehensive plan. Leslie and I have spent a great deal of time talking with each other about this, and we don't want to expose a rezoning application to all of the guidance discussions and vision statements that are in the comprehensive plan. We really want to focus those decisions on the framework map and the framework categories that were established in the comprehensive plan. So where appropriate, we will try to make that distinction as well, so that when, let's say we're doing a rezoning on somebody's piece of property and they want to rezone it to match up with the objectives of the framework map and the comprehensive plan, we can point to that plan and say, yeah, they're doing that and that's consistent, or they're doing something different, it's not consistent, and we can discuss why. So there are those opportunities in there as well.
Just to weigh in real quick, I think it makes sense to say we want to use the comp plan as a guiding force. I just think we have to be careful not to say you must find that, as a criteria for approval, that it is consistent with sections A, B, and C of the comp plan prior to approval. That's where there's that Black Forest case out of El Paso that becomes problematic, where, you can kind of unintentionally say the comp plan is a part of the regulatory approval. So we just have to be careful about, but I think that the way that it's phrased is probably fine.
Thank you, Frank. All right. Matt, if you're still out there, I don't know if you can see us or not.
I can.
If you wanna
Gabby
go
or
back-
Matt, can I make a request that you not share the screen unless you're referencing something specific, and then that way we can see each other a little bit better for the conversation?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Matt, it looks like I'm not able to share my video. It says the video has been disabled.
okay, I'll work on that. Did you want to maybe highlight some of the things that were on the slide regarding topics further discussion?
Sure, yeah. There was 3 of them on there, and we actually just covered one of them, which was the references to the comp plan. The other 2 were the wildlife standards and the residential / ag buffer standards. So maybe we can cover wildlife first. I think that's a more straightforward issue to discuss. And we just wanted to emphasize that the wildlife standards are being carried forward unchanged from the current code. I think there was maybe a comment that those were excessive that we could discuss, but that's not a proposed policy change.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was working on the thing and I missed some of that. That's point.
I just said the wildlife standards are unchanged. They're being carried forward without modification.
Yeah, I spoke to a couple planning commissioners today, and Commissioner Jensen, it seemed like you had some concerns about the wildlife regulations. Maybe you would, you look like you're muted, but maybe you could share some of your thoughts with us on that. I know that we talked about that a little bit this afternoon.
Yeah, we did. I just, I know it's being carried forward, but it's not part of our phase 2 conversations that we'd had. I look at some of those regulations in that wildlife area, and namely one of them comes to mind because we've had it come up in our hearings a couple of times, and I don't have it in front of me. I didn't pull it right out here real quick, but with regards to migration patterns and those types of things, there's been some testimony in front of us about how onerous some of those policies are, and sometimes how ridiculous they can be interpreted. And I had hoped that this would be somewhat of an opportunity to look at some of those. It's one of the longest subsections that we have, and I think some of it's maybe doesn't fit anymore, or maybe doesn't play out well. And I can pull those up and we can talk about them specifically later, Matt, if you want. I don't know that we need to spend a whole lot of time here parsing out this or that. But in general, to me, it just seems really super onerous. And I think a lot of it really can be modified and simplified, and we didn't even look at it. And I think it's a missed opportunity, quite frankly.
Okay. Well, I certainly think that if we have the opportunity to expand conversations on it at phase 2, if there's something specific that we should be focusing on, then maybe we could do that. I went through that regulation after we talked a little bit today, and it seems like the standards and whatnot and the requirements for maybe a plan when there is the potential for wildlife impacts seems pretty straightforward. It might be that some of the review criteria that were outlined in there were a bit lengthy and extensive, and maybe that's something that we should take a harder look at. You and I can talk about that offline, Jeff, maybe a little bit, and see if that's something we need to bring up with the adoption process. A second topic that really came up.
Just a second. Some of them are really extensive and redundant. And that's some of my concern. And you and I can talk offline about some of those things too. No problem.
Okay. Does anybody else have any concerns or had any concerns with the wildlife regulations that they'd like to bring up?
Matt, I would just point out that there has been some activity in the chat replying to some of what's been said.
Yeah, thanks. I'm reading through it real quick, sorry. It looks like, and feel free guys to unmute and share your thoughts. Commissioner Johnson was commenting earlier that that wordsmithing as it relates to some of the rezoning activity could be done. Really not that it's a bad concept or anything. He thinks that the O open is a good example. It's really a nebulous type of a zone district, and to make new zone districts that potentially could replace it make a whole lot of sense. He also commented that that the administrative process that we are proposing to put into place, even today, you know, we have a standing meeting with the Board of County Commissioners every Monday, in which Lori Catterich and Leslie Ellis attend that meeting and discuss with the commissioners a variety of topics. And so she always, Leslie always brings up, you know, what's on the next agenda, or are there any approvals or things that are going on that the commissioners need to be aware of. So just to reinforce that there are some checks and balances in place on the administrative process that I think Commissioner Johnson agrees with. Gary agreed with the implementation that Matt Goebel was talking to us will help determine the practicality and performance of development standards. And Commissioner Kafalis, it's a good time, Commissioner Kafalis, if you want to jump in and add anything about the wildlife regulations that you would, but Commissioner Kafalis asks that before we change anything significantly in that section that we have an open conversation about it. So moving forward, the next topic that I think came up from several of the commissioners today when I was speaking to you was the buffer zones. I know last time we met at and talked last month about the code updates, we had buffer zones attached to the end of where ag zoning was. And the idea was, and it didn't come across very well, was that when somebody proposes a new development, like a new housing development or something, and they're in proximity to an ag use or something like that, that in order to minimize the potential impacts of those two uses, that we would prefer to set up some sort of standards for buffering, whether that's creating actual physical space between the uses or using trees or fences or berms and a combination of features. And I think it was a little bit misinterpreted, but regardless, we took that and we moved it into the development standards section of the code. And we did that intentionally because it's not just about buffering ag from residential or ag from another use and separating them. to create compatibility. It's about using those standards as it relates to other things. So I might suggest that I put in a use such as a manufacturing facility of some sort, and I do it in proximity to a housing development or to some other type of use, let's say a school, and I'm using hazardous materials. It might be appropriate that there be separation there. And it's either separation or some sort of a physical barrier to create a compatibility between it, whether it's because of noise or lighting or some other potential impact. And so we're not trying to force a particular way of doing it. We're trying to create an opportunity for creating compatibility through a variety of things. And I think one of the hangups is, and Commissioner Doherty pointed this out to me, that on page, one of the pages of the document, it says that there would be a 200-foot setback between agricultural and residential lots, or between a residential use. And so those things are open for discussion. Maybe that number shouldn't be in there. Maybe it should be that there should be some buffer proposed by the development, and that those numbers or their techniques for doing buffering are discussed as part of the development application process for appropriateness. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to open it up to the floor and allow you guys to have comments on that. I know that several of you have a few comments on it.
I think one concern that I saw is that having those buffer zones could potentially trigger if let's just say the dairyman wanted to bring homes in for his family, for his parents or his kids, and without caveats, it might trigger him not being able to build his homes where he would like to for his family, because we set him up to protect neighborhoods or protect the dairy farmer from neighborhoods. Is there some way we can be sure that the landowner themselves are protected to subdivide their own land when it comes to their own family and their own needs?
I think. Can I jump in there, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we did try to put in some language to get at that point. It's actually on page 186. It's in the applicability of the buffer. And we added some language that said, this buffer is not required for residential development that is part of an agricultural operation. We could maybe fine tune that a little bit more and clarify what we mean by is part of, but that language is specifically in response to the conversation you all had about family members. So I think the intent is to not make this apply to those situations. So we just need to make sure that this exemption clearly says that.
Very good.
I think the intent of our code is compatibility. And I don't think it should be there at all, because we're going to go through a special review or administrative review, and they're going to have to, they're going to have to prove compatibility anyway. And to arbitrarily stick a number in there, I don't think it belongs in there at all, quite frankly.
Well, and just to inform the conversation, I wanted to clarify, it's not just a flat number, it's a range. So basically it says your starting point is 200, but you can reduce that to 50 feet, all the way down to 50 feet if you go through the special review process and you say something about the nature of the use and you make your case. So basically anybody that's got some creativity coming in here is going to be able to carve out flexibility from that 200-foot number. That's the point. I think when I hear y'all kind of spotlight that 200-foot number, that tells me we need to rewrite this a little bit to clarify how it is more of a range and it's not just a minimum 200 feet, because that does sound onerous and that's not the intent.
It specifically says, and I'll quote on page 186,
yeah.
The setback for a residence shall be 200 feet from all property lines adjoining an existing agricultural use. May be reduced, right? But the first sentence in that is what's going to be seen, and I'm afraid is what is going to be abused.
I got you, Jeff. No, I completely agree. I think when you read the two sentences together, that's where you get the range idea. But the way it's written now, I agree. People are just going to focus on that first sentence. So we need to rewrite this to clarify that's a range.
And I think to chime in on this, I think one of the things that we wanted to accomplish is that the person that gets the flexibility in this to help decide what's appropriate is the actual applicant. So if I'm proposing a subdivision or a land division, then I get to look at a variety of options. I can choose to do a berm with some trees on it, maybe because that's adequate to create the buffer. Maybe it's just a series of a 10-foot buffer with trees in it and a certain type of a fence that would create that separation. We want to allow the flexibility to be determined in the design of the project, and then that can be weighed in when the decision making is being
I
sought.
think one of the things we might want to do in a place like this is, instead of leading with a specific number and then allowing maybe some flexibility with the number, if we led with a definition that says that buffering can be distance, landscaping, topography, fencing, probably we could think of a few other things that might go there. And then we begin to make other suggestions. If it's only distance, maybe 200 feet's okay. If there's something else with it, probably that can be reduced. And the other thing is a blanket statement, or what appears to be a blanket statement that says you have to set back so far from an agricultural operation. Agriculture has a range of activities associated with it, some of which might make very good neighbors, some of which might not make such good neighbors to people moving out from the city. And so some thought from the developers team, their marketing people, et cetera, and some flexibility that offer a cafeteria plan here might be a good idea.
John, I think that's a really good point. I just wanted to clarify, we already have done what you suggested by introducing this section with kind of a menu approach of different types of buffers. So if you look at that paragraph on page 186, paragraph C, basically we say there shall be a buffer. It shall be one of three types of things: a setback buffer, or an existing physical feature that counts as a buffer that provides some separation, or a constructed buffer, a new thing. So the setback buffer that is getting all the attention right here, that's only one of the options. Someone could choose the other two options. But what I'm hearing from this conversation is we need to do a better job of drafting to clarify that it's not just a flat number, that there's a lot of different flexibility here. People just need to choose the one that works for them. But what you suggested, I just wanted to be clear, it's already in the draft.
If I may, just for a second there, I don't see that as an a la carte complete menu, because regardless, setback buffer says, okay, 200 feet, fine, maybe reduced to 50 feet, but it can't be reduced any less than that. What are setbacks elsewhere in the county? Do we have 50-foot setbacks for anything else in the county? I don't necessarily encourage them, but my point being, okay, if it's a pig farm, I know that a buyer's not going to buy a home that's that close to a pig farm. But if we take away their right to choose, we're taking away property rights of the owner of that property.
Again, the definition, the number is just referring to the setback buffer, which is just one option that the applicant could choose. They could choose, they could come in with a site plan that says there's already some existing, line of trees or something that creates an adequate buffer, or they could create the constructed buffer. The text in 1, 2, and 3 is just designed to define the options in the intro paragraph, which is controlling. So they don't have to do that large buffer. They can propose something else.
Might be helpful to change the structure of that paragraph and do the setback buffer as the third one. So you read, instead you read constructed buffer, you read existing vegetative, topographical, or other physical buffer, and then you also read at the end of it maybe a setback buffer that increases the setback requirements. And you would just reverse the whole thing so people understand that the setback is just one of the three alternatives there. And it may be, because it's at the very top and the very first one, it's hitting everybody in the face. But if you move it down, it just kind of defines that particular one. I'm not objecting. I think maybe you could use, instead of using shall, you might use some other word than shall, because you have it as shall be 200 feet unless you do a special review. There's a question there about how you might reword that. But I think if you look at the first paragraph under C, it's pretty clear you have alternatives. And it's just we're overemphasizing and looking at that 100-foot thing and saying, hey, wait a second.
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion, Nancy.
So,
think in terms of Gully's greenhouse. They have their flowers right along the roadside. Would this new code change that, and would they not be allowed to do that?
no, not at all.
Okay.
It doesn't, it's not intended to impose the person that's already there. So let me.
No. I'm saying if they were to be a new Gully's greenhouse somewhere
But
else.
from the road, it wouldn't. No.
Okay.
And I don't think it would from property lines unless there was really a reason for it. So let's. I would like to suggest two things. One, first, this really shouldn't just be, in my opinion, focused on agriculture. There's other uses. So let's say we've had lots of times where people have come in and proposed to do dog kennels, and they might be internal, and you can hear noise through walls and things like that. And we've gone through the entire process and tried to discuss with applicants solutions, and the applicants have chosen to say, this is the way I'm going to proceed with my application. And we get to a planning commission hearing, and planning commissioners would say, or board of county commissioners might say, no, you're going to need to do something different in order to be compatible, because we're hearing from your neighbors of the potential impacts to this. And then we end up ad hoc at some meeting adding a standard and applying it. And so there's ways that this could be assigned. And I would, that's a possible way of doing it. But what I'm hearing tonight, and maybe we, so that we keep this moving and we don't get snared on one particular subject, I think Matt and his team and I have heard that there needs to be a little bit of wordsmithing to this. My general question would be from all of you is, do you agree that buffering is a necessary tool to implement as part of the code in order to achieve compatibility in some instances? And if so, we'll go ahead and we'll wordsmith this so that it creates a clear scenario, one that gives the option to the developer or the person doing something on their property to give us a design that fits their needs first.
Matt, I think you asked two different questions there.
Yep, I did.
Mm-hmm. First question was, do you think it's a necessary tool? My answer to that is no, because when you add in some instances, well, I might be able to say, well, yeah, in some instances, but that's why we have special review. That's why we have those systems put in place to allow for compatibility to come in place instead of a non-flexible written code that you can't get past.
I thought part of the process for doing this is so we could get away from the argument about what compatible isn't compatible. And I vote for the buffer. I think that's an excellent way of dealing with that. People have a choice about how to do it and whether it's necessary. But we've had these arguments for years about compatibility, and the less we can argue about that in hearings, the better it is.
I think one of the things is we have to look at this in two ways. One is the special review that's coming into a neighborhood, and that's one instance. But the other thing is the residential housing or the low intensity land use that's coming to a potential nuisance. And the buffer here works both ways, and whoever's coming in ends up with the burden. I think it's appropriate to do it in most of the rural areas where we're up against agriculture. And I hate to pick on this example again, but we're looking at a conservation development where that setback would basically be part of the 80% of residual land that is left open. It just happens to be used in this case as buffer. It's not as if we're giving up lots here. And so I think there's a lot of flexibility in the way to apply this. We've got design flexibility worked in, and we've got spatial flexibility. And I think it's appropriate that we don't have, that we don't lose the opportunity to do buffering on the use that's coming in, even if it is a use by right.
I agree with Nancy and John as well. I'm all for buffer zones. Really excited to see it in there. And there again, wanted to thank the Clarion Group, really being kind of fresh at looking at land use code, comprehensive plan, all those things. I found it to be strangely exciting and very well written. You know, it's easy for the general public to be able to look at that and see what's going to happen with an application, what the expectations are. And I really like the fact that it's easy to read. Staff is so great at holding people's hands that it's basically like you have your own manual right there. If you follow the plan, staff will follow the plan. I'm all for it. Thanks, Clarion. Thanks, staff. And yes, on buffer zones.
All right.
So I'll say that I think that as written, the applicability of the buffer zones is a reasonable compromise. It does give the applicants their choice on how to do it, and it's not particularly onerous. My only comment is below that on page 186 references what can go in the agricultural buffer zone, and I think that we should be we should outline in broad terms not all the different things that can go in there, but we should be very clear that you can use that property for a heck of a lot of reasons. And, we outlined, for example, right there, drainage swales and stormwater retention ponds, which is weird to me because nobody uses stormwater retention ponds. They use detention ponds. And there are a lot of other stormwater quality features that property could be used at. That's just a minor example. My request would be to look at that list and say, what else, if I were a planner, would I want to see an applicant come back and say, in this 50 feet, this 200 feet, whatever, this is what I want to do with that property. And I would like that to be broadened out as much as possible while still accomplishing the goal of having the separation between different intensity and different types of use.
Okay, well, I think that's been a good discussion, and I think we got some pretty good direction on how to move forward with this. I would say that there was one instance in my history out on East Mulberry where we had a commercial development going directly adjacent to a wildlife area. Nancy, you might remember it. And we actually designed that project such that the building was the buffer, so that the building was placed strategically so that there was a separation between human area and the wildlife area, and the building was there because the building did not cause a wildlife issue. So there's lots of ways to achieve compatibility, and I think we're just really trying to make sure that we have some tools in there to help us get to that. So with that, I think we're going to move on a little bit more. That was a good conversation about buffering. We'll do some changes before we come back to you in December. I know that several of you have some wordsmithing type things. I talked to Mr. Barnett about that today. Some things around some of the languages in the code and whatnot. And certainly if you do and you want to talk about it, feel free to give me a call and I'll try to explain things the best I can. Those seem to be the high points that came up today. I would like to maybe share with you just for a moment one of the topics that's coming up, and you guys have been hearing a lot about it, is we're renaming some of these zone districts and whatnot and consolidating them. And we had some GIS work that was done by our GIS department. And if you'd like, I can share some of that information with you and show you kind of what that looks like, what kind of area that's impacting or not. If you would like, we could spend a little bit more time talking about character areas and zoning. I think one of the things that came up was the character areas are about aligning zoning with what's going on in the community, but it's also a way for us to, as Gabby put it earlier, is to align our development standards. That if you're in a rural area, you might be putting in development standards such as landscaping, or parking, or some of the lighting. Some of those things will be tailored towards the context in which you're in, rather than having this one size fits all that everybody landscapes regardless of what's going on, you know. And so the character area really speaks to that. And I think it's really important if you can read section 2 again, just really breeze through what the character areas are, and that that would really be good. If you want me to spend time on that, I can. If not, I'm going to open up the floor and ask if anybody wants to talk about any other subjects here tonight on the code. Don't all speak at once.
Well, with regard to the streamlining of applications and, you know, getting rid of the mandatory hearings and things like that, that'll definitely reduce the cost for the applicants. Am I correct?
In a lot of instances it would, Curtis. That's a great point. We've taken and we've moved a lot of the decision making, and it's intentional, down into the realm of the director. And so if a use comes in and meets the minimum standards that we have set forth in the code, they should be able to get administratively approved. In the subdivision section, or the general procedure section, I think it's section 6, you'll find that we created an administrative subdivision process. That's something that we haven't had before. And it says that if you can come in and meet certain criteria right up front, when you're doing the sketch plan application with us, if you can meet those criteria, we're inclined to approve you administratively rather than to have you go through a full development application, hearings, all that. That could save you up to 6 months in the process, and a lot of work. So we think that there's things in here that will definitely improve the usability of our rules and how we can implement rules without making it so cumbersome that people have to wait a long period of time to get their approvals. So thank you. That was
good.
Just a few things. First of all, the zoning district table 2.1. I'd like to see that as, from a standpoint that it gets copied into the table 3 area where all the use tables are. So it's easier to find when somebody's going through this and looking and reference what the zoning districts really are and what they're looking at in the allowed primary uses. Now, I was part of the committee that worked on thresholds. There's a couple of things in here, Matt, that I'd like to ask you about. I don't know if we missed them or if this was an afterthought on my part, because I don't have my notes from those meetings specifically with me, but there's a couple of uses that, you know, according to these tables, if it's blank, it means it's not allowed. And so I want to go to page 56. When you look at table 3.2, use regulations, conservation and agriculture, under the agriculture support and services, agriculture equipment and repair sales. Now we have that as a site plan in the ACE area and nothing in the ag area. And I think we had this conversation that at minimum that should be an administrative special review in ag for equipment and repair, for that guy that wants, you know, work on tractors or trucks or, you know, something like that specific to the agriculture. And I think we missed that one.
I'll take a look at that. It may be that we've construed that to be an accessory function to an agricultural operation. So I have an ag operation and I have a barn and certain things, and I'm allowed through the rural occupations rules, I'm allowed to use my property to do it as a rural occupation. If I rise above the level of a rural occupation, which is pretty extensive use, then it would be more appropriate for me to rezone my property to be an agricultural commercial enterprise, and do it that way. And I think that's why that got there. Sean was on the use committee that I had, and we talked a lot of where the thresholds were, whether or not that threshold should actually be carried through, and what districts those should be in. So there was some teasing a part of that. But certainly if you have those and you identified them and I need to go take a second look at those, I would be more than happy to do that.
And I think I'll get exactly the same answer when I tell you that microbrewery, cidery, winery, meadery, or distillery in those same areas in the ACE and open areas. I think you may try to explain it exactly the same way, but I find that same issue in those three areas for that specific line. We have that as a plan when we get into the mixed use or the mixed center. But I think it could be an administrative special review above that. And then many of these areas in the lodging facilities in FOA and ACE, boarding, hotel, resort lodge, none of those areas are, I should say, all of those in those areas, except for FO and A and greater than 10 and less than 10 guests for bed and breakfasts, are not allowed. And I'm not so sure that's appropriate in those areas either.
I'll take a look at those. And
so if I may, just real quick, Matt, I don't recall the conversation about ACE for repair of equipment. I don't remember us having that. I do remember us having the conversation about microbrewery, cidery, et cetera. And I think the reason that we came up with those not being appropriate in the ACE or agriculture area is the intensity of the use, the vehicular trips, et cetera, that could be built from that. And we see that in some of the growth of some of these microbreweries that are no longer micro. From that standpoint, I think was the reason why we wanted to keep microbreweries, cidery, et cetera, closer to where a bar and tavern is.
So Commissioner Doherty, I think I remember that conversation as well. And we talked about it's appropriate to have a winery or a microbrewery that has a tasting room. So I might be brewing on my lot as a value-added agricultural use or doing something like that, and I have a small tasting room. Our concern, Commissioner Jensen, was that what happens when a lot of these breweries and stuff, microbreweries, they start out and they just have a small tasting room. You go in, you get a taste of something, and then you buy whatever you buy and you leave. It's kind of like a winery or whatnot. What we don't want them to become is full-on bars where people are going and hanging out and playing cornhole and having large activities, because that's not conducive of those places. And if we're going to have those might be more appropriate for our non-residential zone districts. And that's where the use group went, if I'm not correct, Mr. Doherty.
I think that's right.
I appreciate your explanation. I still think we look at that as an administrative review process instead of banning that in those areas. One other to bring up when we get down to the end of that table, 62, when we look at towers and things like that, I didn't specifically get into the tower regulations, but I know some of these were changed, and I don't think this table reflects what the wireless communication regulations we did a year ago. I don't think it reflects it directly. Just take a look at that again, if you would, Matt.
Yeah, that should have been just a straight carryover.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it to me, so.
We'll verify that.
Matt, if I can bring up, you were talking about the character areas earlier. I still have a little bit of a concern that we are forcing, well, let me step back for just a second here and explain what I mean. First of all, on these character areas, you've got some things like forestry has a typical traditional area that it's got to be. You've got trees, okay? As natural resources, you've got public lands, you've got open lands. So that's got some details to it. Ag is very wide open, and I'm afraid of taking away a farmer's right to do with their property just because we have a character area, and this would force them to have to stay in ag regardless. Now, help me understand that a little bit more, please, because this is just very subjective in the fact that we are saying, hey, that looks like a great ag area. You know, it's not that it's a forested area. It's not that it's owned by a public entity. It's just looks great. Let's keep it open as ag.
Ag is a zone district that you have the option to rezone your property to. It's not something that you would have to do. You're allowed to continue to keep your open zoning in place in doing that way. The idea of the character areas was, what's the predominant use of property in those areas? So as you move north in Larimer County and even west up into the foothills, ranching and agricultural are predominant land uses that are out there. Yeah, you got some housing and you got some ranches or, you know, farms or whatnot. And so the idea is that we recognize that that's an agricultural part of our community, and the dominant use out there is that, and we should support, which comes from the previous master plan and is carried through our current comprehensive plan, the whole idea of maintaining an agricultural heritage in Larimer County. And so we've identified that in the areas where you're predominantly going to find that character area, there's not going to be water. There's not, you know, by public water, I mean, there might be wells, but there's limited availability of water. You're not going to have public sewer. You're going to have dirt roads. You're going to have different types of infrastructure out there, and that infrastructure is mainly going to be tailored towards a very rural environment, predominantly around agriculture. And so the character area was designed to say, we know where those areas kind of are. It's in the mountains, it's in the foothills, and it's in the northern reaches of the county predominantly. And we shouldn't necessarily say, well, hey, you know, you ought to be able to put a bunch of housing up there. If you can't come up with public water, you're not going to get a development that's going to provide any density for housing up there. And so, you know, let's put into place a land settlement pattern that's appropriate for that. And that's why we suggest that the rural land use process be the appropriate land division process up in those areas, because it's the only subdivision process in the county right now that allows you to use a well. So it keeps people's private property rights. People still get to subdivide and create lots and do some of those things. Do they get to do it at the level you could do in Fort Collins? Oh, no, because the infrastructure isn't there to support it. So we're really taking a hard look when we did the comprehensive plan of what is the character of the county and what are the predominant uses and where are utilities, and let's focus the appropriate development patterns to those areas. And I think that's what those concepts are about.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Bring up another little one. Just a little one. Page 101, when we talk about backyard chickens.
I'd like to go back.
Nancy had a comment.
Okay, go ahead. I'll let you go.
All right. So, you know, this whole issue of agricultural development in the county, it's never been where a farmer could take his whole place and develop it into a subdivision. You know, we've had conservation developments on our open for what, since at least this last code was in existence since we had the meeting at the Marriott. And I think this is just a small explanation for the agricultural process. And it isn't different from that. I mean, they still can do the conservation developments. People can still have the O open. And all this says is, it says if you want to protect it and do more agricultural in your area and you want to have a little bit of an additional incentive, we have this process to do that. But I think you know, if you have the idea of taking away from the previous things that they could do, it's not. It's just enhancing it. So I just think we have to make sure we don't give people the impression that we're taking away the same rights they've had to develop for the last, how many years has it been, Matt? 20, 30 years?
25.
25 years. So I really do think this argument was the argument that was done 25 years ago is just being carried forward. And I think we really don't want to get into the position at our public meetings and to say that this is somehow limiting the rights of those farmers to do what they've been able to do and could continue to do if they choose to. It just gives them another alternative.
Jeff, you had another comment on another item?
Yeah, just on page 101, backyard chickens. The county is limiting that at 6 chickens. Even the city of Fort Collins allows us to have 8 with a half acre or more. I think we can come more in alignment with that. I think this is not enough. So
There's a couple of sections now that are addressing chickens. We are in phase 2 going to be talking probably pretty heavily about poultry. That's become a discussion with the urban farming community or the small farm community, and they want to talk a little bit more about livestock handling and animal husbandry and how they can deal with some of those activities. So that's going to come up. Keep in mind, backyard chickens is on very small lots, and yeah, those regulations are probably only, I'm going to say probably about 7 years old when we adopted them. We adopted them and had pretty extensive comments. If we can look at the city's regulations for Collins, Loveland, and see if their numbers are higher, and if so, we'll match up to those.
they are, and I think we could. Let me make one other comment, then I think I'm done for tonight. On page 108, under home occupation, we had this conversation in a work session several years ago about the home occupation registration certificate. And I think this planning commission is very clear to staff that we do not support that. And now it comes in this code and says that it's encouraged. If you add it in that line that says, but not required, that would satisfy me. But if I was to read that as staff or somebody else, it's going to be like, whoop, now I got to register my home occupation. And I think we made that very clear several years ago that that was not a road that we wanted to go down in Larimer County to require that. And I don't like the way that this got put in here.
Fair enough. And that was a carryover language. Says that today, and we're just carrying it over, but we can clean that up.
We made a mistake with it 25 years ago. Doesn't mean we keep it going.
Yep.
That's all.
Yeah.
Nine chickens. We can go with 9. That's what I vote for. I'm going to fall on my sword.
I think that the home, I just want to reinforce something on the home occupation regs and the rural occupation regs. There's something that they're in there and they're overlooked quite a bit in our code. A lot of people are say, and I think it came up once tonight, why couldn't a guy do tractor implement or do tractor repair or has a welder in his garage and needs to help fix people's equipment in the rural community or something like that. Our home occupation regulations and our rural occupation support that. And the idea of the home occupation regs back when they were last amended years ago with Kathy Reynolds was on, that's how long ago it was decided that a home occupation, when it hit a certain level, which is we've got defined in the code, once it got there, it should no longer be a home occupation. It should seek to be a business and locate where businesses are appropriate, because it's just got to a scale that is no longer appropriate as a home occupation. And so in hindsight, we never had a zoning district in Larimer County that would allow you to upzone your property in the rural areas to put a commercial use that supports the ag or the rural environment. And that's where this ACE zone district comes into place. Now, if you have a home occupation or a rural occupation, and hopefully it's very successful and it grows and it grows and it grows, and all of a sudden it's too big or exceeds the standards of the county for being a rural occupation or a home occupation, we now have an opportunity where somebody could come in and justify rezoning their property and say, well, maybe this is an appropriate location for me to have a business, and I'm going to get approval for that zoning and then I will be legit under that zoning.
But
there are some options there.
That doesn't happen until there's a complaint. Code compliance is what drives that if it gets too big. So I don't think that needs to change.
Right. No, I agree. We only react on a complaint basis. Is there anything else that you guys have looked at in the code that puts a thorn in your side that maybe we need to look at before next month? If you haven't had a chance to get all the way through the code, and I know that's a lot of reading material, just brush through it. And if something hits you, let us know. We'll try to get it addressed and updated before we get to the hearings in December. With that, I think that we can go ahead. Matt, is there anything else we wanted to talk about? I know that there was talk about implementation of the code, and the effective date of the code was one of the other subjects.
Yeah, we raised that at the beginning of the presentation, just throwing out the idea of a May 1st. Did anyone have any heartburn when they heard that, or did they think that it seemed to make sense? Any comments on the effective date idea?
I thought it was too, quite frankly. And the reason why I think it's too far out is because staff has been involved in this very heavily for the last, and I'm going to say 4 years, because very heavily involved in the comprehensive plan, very heavily involved in this. I think adoption to implementation, I think Q2 is certainly reasonable to give Q1 an opportunity for staff to come up to speed. But if a lot of this has come across, which it has, and more than half of this packet hasn't even been addressed, I see no reason to go 6 months out to make that happen. My preference would be immediately, right? But I would think at worst, it's implemented at the end of Q1.
And I think that May was about where we were projecting, was beginning of May, which is about the end of Q1 anyways. Commissioners, the reason why we asked for that time frame is a couple of things. When you're changing the code as substantially as we are now, we haven't had an opportunity, because it's a shifting model. It's always shifting and changing. And so we can't go in and update our computer systems and get them set up to handle the new language, the new things. We've got to build some new work programs within our computers. We also would like to have an opportunity to actually test this against some existing cases that are out there to make sure that we don't have any holes that we didn't plug, or some things that we missed out. And that's why we were suggesting May 1st. The county, aside from this code project, we have a lot of work that's on the table, and this involves having our IT department and others be involved in this, and because of that, it's going to take a little bit of time. And I think that's why we were suggesting right around the beginning of May.
Yeah, I'll chime in for that too. If there are others who support moving faster, we will certainly move as quickly as we can. But as Matt said, we have a whole team that's looking at our EnerGov system and all the different aspects that we have to have in place to make this possible. So if there's interest in looking at, say, April 1st or maybe a date in March, we can certainly move as quickly as we can. But there are others involved and affected by this too. So we're trying to make sure that we're cognizant of that.
And if I could just jump in there, Leslie, I just wanted to reassure people that the phase 2 work will go ahead in the meantime. It's not like we're going to wait until the effective date for phase 2 to continue. So the train will keep moving on those other substantive updates.
And then the last thing I'll add is one of the recommendations that we will have with the adoption of this is that the director has the ability to allow for non-substantive changes. So word errors, spelling errors, typos, maybe some references and other things like that that don't substantively change the code, that we're allowed to do updates to that while we're getting prepared for the implementation, so that we don't have to keep coming back to hearing on those changes.
I think that, given how far out we're talking about doing this, I would prefer a month earlier, March 31st or so, I think would be better than May 1. April 1 is just not an auspicious day, I don't think, to implement something.
Oh, come on. That sounds like fun.
But March 31st, I think would be good if we could possibly do that.
We'll consult with our IT department and others and see if that can be fit into our work program. We certainly don't want it to make it any longer than it needs to be. So thank you for that input. Anybody else? Frank, you still awake over there? All right. We appreciate your time and effort on this, and it's a lot of information to read and get updated on and whatnot. And it's just a major undertaking, and we have done it in a relatively short time. It's only been a little over a year since we've received our outline as to what we should be working on. So a lot of work's been done. Thank you to Clarion and all them for the hard work they've done, and you, the planning commissioners and commissioners, for helping us out with that. So I look forward to December, and hopefully we can get through an adoption on this first phase, and then we can continue to improve the code over the next couple of months after that. With that, I'm going to let you guys go. I appreciate your time tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanksgiving.
Good night.
It's just us three, just us two. That go okay, Don?
Yeah, you guys rocked it. A lot less bloodshed than I figured. I don't know if you saw that, but Commissioner-elect Shattuck McNally is one of the attendees.
Oh, she must have logged on after I'd been paying attention. That's
It
good.
was about 10 minutes in, but she listened to most of it, so it's good for that perspective. But have a good night.
Yeah. Hey, thank you.
See ya.